on one foot, yatha, as, eva, indeed, ekena, by another foot, gacchati, goes, yatha, as, trinajalauka, a worm on a vegetable, evam, in this way, dehi, the living entity, karmagatim, the reactions of fruitive activities, gataha, undergoes. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Labacharnarvinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. Just as a person traveling on the road rests on rests one foot on the ground and then lifts the other, or as a worm on a vegetable transfers itself to one leaf and then gives up the previous one, the conditioned soul takes shelter of another body and then gives up the one he had before. Can I repeat the translation? Just as a person traveling on the road rests one foot on the ground and then lifts the other, or as a worm on a vegetable transfers itself to one leaf and then gives up the previous one, the conditioned soul takes shelter of another body and then gives up the one he had before. Purport. This is the process of the soul's transmigration from one body to another. At the time of death, according to his mental condition, the living being is carried by the subtle body, consisting of mind, intelligence, and ego, to another gross body. When higher authorities have decided what kind of gross body the living entity will have, he is forced to enter such a body, and thus he automatically gives up his previous body. Dull minded persons who do not have the intelligence to understand this process of transmigration take for granted that when the gross body is finished, one's life is finished forever. Such persons have no brains with which to understand the process of transmigration. At the present moment, there is a great opposition to the Hare Krishna movement, which is being called a brainwashing movement. But actually, the so called scientists, philosophers, and other leaders in the Western countries have no brains at all. The Hare Krishna movement is trying to elevate such foolish persons by enlightening their intelligence so that they will take advantage of the human body. Unfortunately, because of gross ignorance, they regard the Hare Krishna movement as a brainwashing movement. They do not know that without God consciousness, one is forced to continue transmigrating from one body to another. Because of their devilish brains, they will next be forced to accept an abominable life and practically never be able to liberate themselves from the conditional life of material existence. How this transmigration of the soul takes place is very clearly explained in this verse. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport and translation to Canto 1, Chapter 1, Text 40 of Srimad Bhagavatam. ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमो ॐ विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणि प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषशून्यवादि पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. In this verse, Vasudeva is very nicely explaining how the soul transmigrates from one body to another by giving us two practical examples. So he's saying here, Vrajan Tishtan Pada Ekena Yata Eva Ekena Gachati. The first example he quotes is Yatha, just like a person, Vrajan Tishtan, when he walks on the road, Tishtan, after placing one foot forward, Tishtan Pada Ekena, after placing one foot on the ground, then Eva Ekena Gachati, he places another foot. How do we walk? This is how we walk. We place one step and then we get the support and then we place the another foot. Like that, one after the other, we place our foot and keep walking, although we don't recognize it. So he's minutely analyzing this. So we place one foot, then again another foot, again another foot. That means what does it mean? If the next foot, if I place, there is no solid ground, I will not place my foot. Sometime you might have seen there is a depression. Then I will change my direction, right? Natural. So unless I get a solid footing, solid ground, I'll not place my foot. So this is happening automatically because of our training. But actually, if you analyze, we are very cautious in placing our feet, our foot. So just as a person traveling on the road rests one foot on the ground at a time and then lifts the other to place his second foot. Example 1. Second example is Yatha or Trina Jalauka Evam. Just like a worm on a vegetable. How does a worm move on a vegetable? It first moves on to one leaf, another leaf. And once it has moved to the other leaf, it will give up the previous leaf. You see how a worm moves on a leaf. One leaf to the other leaf. You carefully observe this time. After it has got a solid footing on the second leaf, it will give up the first leaf. It's a very good example. Now the comparison is similarly, Dehi Karma Gatim Gataha. The conditioned soul, Dehi, the conditioned soul, Karma Gatim Gataha. After he takes shelter of another body, he gives up the previous body. That means when my next body is decided, then I give up this present body. Until then, I'm not giving up my present body. This is the arrangement. Jai Krishna Balaram Gonita Prabhupada. When my next body is fixed up, which body I'm going to enter? It could be demigod's body, devata's body, it could be human body, it could be animal body, it could be rich body or a poor man's body, whatever. Once that is decided, then I give up my present body in which I am staying. So it is not that by accident one is getting another body. Once the arrangement is made, what body I am going to get, I give up the present body. It is also not that I give up this body and there is no clarity which body I am going to get. Neither such confusion is there. It is very clear. When my next body is decided, then only I am giving up this present body. Who is deciding? That is another subject. But my next body is decided, then I give the present body. Just like, that's why Vasudeva is explaining to Kamsa that you place one foot, then you know for sure, oh, it is solid ground, then only you will take the next step. Or a worm is moving from one leaf to the other. Once it gets hold of the next leaf, then it gives up the first leaf or the earlier leaf. So this is called the process of transmigration of the soul from one body to another. But the transmigration is happening only from body to body. Who is transmigrating? That is referred by the word Dehi, the conditioned soul. The Atma. Atma is moving from one body to another body. This is a very important point. That means Atma is different, body is different. Who is transmigrating? Who is moving from one body to another body? It is the Atma or the soul who's moving from one body to another body. So, on what basis the Atma is moving from one body to another body? Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport. And when it is decided, on what basis and when it is decided that you are going to change into another body, change to another body. So the time is at the time of death. The change of body takes place at the time of death. Okay, then what is the basis? According to one's mental condition. According to one's mental condition. So we have a gross body and we have a subtle body. And the gross body is grouped around the mind, as described by Lord Krishna in the 15th chapter. So the gross body is grouped around the mind. We have 5 senses: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. So we have 5 senses. They're grouped around the mind. So, what is our mental condition at the time of death? That will carry one to the next body. We have these 5 senses. The 5 senses have an activity. The activity is in connection with its corresponding sense objects. Like for the eyes, it is form. For the ears, it is sound. For the nose, it is smell. For the tongue, it is taste. For the skin, it is touch. So what is the interaction between the senses and the sense objects? The interaction is primarily bunjanam, the act of enjoyment. So the senses wanted to derive pleasure from the sense objects, derive enjoyment from its corresponding sense objects. So that creates an activity. So the entire material world, entire material existence is simply a transaction between the senses and the sense objects. That's all. And the soul has nothing to do with the transaction or the interaction of the senses with their corresponding sense objects. The soul is only a mute spectator. There's activity going on between the sense and the sense object. But the soul is a participant. How is the soul involved in the transaction or the interaction of the senses and the sense objects? The soul is desiring that interaction. It is the soul's desire to enjoy in a particular way, different from another soul's desire to enjoy in a particular way. And interestingly, the same soul also, his desires keep changing also. It is not that his desire is constant. So there are multitude of desires, varieties of desires, and sometimes very controversial desires, which he has rejected one time, he will accept it another time. Which he didn't like at one point, he will start liking another point. So like that, a lot of complexity in his desiring. In any case, based on his desire, he moves his senses towards that particular sense object. So the senses movement toward the sense object is based on, propelled by desire, is accelerated by desire, is moved upon by desire. If there's no desire, there is no activity in the material world. The entire material world is functioning only because of the desire of the soul to enjoy sense object. If there's no desire of the soul to enjoy a sense object through its senses, the entire material world comes to a standstill. You can now, from this perspective, you can analyze the entire material world's activities. So Lord Krishna explains this very nicely in the 15th chapter. The 15th chapter, Krishna says, text 8, 9, 10 and 11 very nicely explains this idea. Text number 8, the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, Shariram yad avapnoti yat chapi utkramatishvaraha grihit vaitani samyati vayur gandhan ivashayat. So Krishna is saying, the living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life. Grihit vaitani samyati carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another. Just like Vayur Gandhan Ivashayat. Just like air carries aroma. Thus, Shariram Yad Avapnoti and Utkramati Ishvaraha. Here Ishvara refers to the soul, not the Lord. Prabhupada translates Ishvara as the Lord of the body, because we should follow the dictation of the Supreme Ishvara, Krishna. But without taking his direction, the soul decides. He has his own plan of how to enjoy in this body, how to enjoy in this world, and how to utilize the senses given to him as per his choice and plan to enjoy, without taking the Lord's direction, how to enjoy in this world, how to utilize this body. He has his own plan. Therefore, he is being described here as Ishvara, or the Lord of his body. But he's not the Lord of all the bodies. That is described in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. He is not the Lord of all the bodies. He is the Lord of his body. He thinks so. He is still not the Lord of his body. He thinks so, because that is also described in the Bhagavad Gita earlier chapter. Prakriti kriyamanani. Everything is done by Prakriti. But he thinks, no, I am able to achieve things. I am able to move my senses towards achievement, towards success. Just like I use my intelligence, I use my mind power, my vocabulary power, I can convince people. So he thinks he is the Lord of his intelligence, Lord of his memory, Lord of his words, Lord of his body, Lord of the situation. So therefore, he is being described as Ishvara. Although he is not the Ishvara, he thinks so. Lord is kindly facilitating his success and control. But if the Lord takes back the control, he has no power to retrieve it back. Just like paralysis you get. What can you do? Brain paralysis. Sometimes, some arm in this body gets paralyzed. Hands, legs, we get paralysis. What can you do? If you're the Lord of the body, why did you get paralysis? Why can't you set it right? Why should you take help of a doctor? Set it right yourself. Sometimes there is memory loss called dementia, sleepless nights, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. So we have sleep problems, we have memory problems. If we are the Lord of our body and our senses, why these things are happening? So he is not able to answer. That means the fact is, I am not the Lord of my body. There is another controller. Not directly the Lord, but the Lord through his material agency called Prakriti or material nature is actually the Lord and controlling. And that Prakriti is also controlling this body through the Devatas by the arrangement of the Supreme Lord Vishnu. So ultimately, Devatas on the ground level are controlling every part of this body. That is described in the Vedic literature. So if you study very deeply, every part in our body is controlled by a particular demigod. Even the movement of your eyelid, it is said, is controlled by a particular devata. So that means you're not even free to move your eyelid without the sanction or permission of a devata on the ground level. The ultimate above level is Prakriti, further to that is the Supreme Lord Vishnu. So nobody is free to act. Elsewhere it is explained, even in the matter of passing stool, one's activity is controlled by a demigod. We're not even free to pass stool also. That much control is there, and still we think we are Ishvara, the Lord of our body, which is an illusion created by material nature to facilitate our illusion to enjoy this material body because we desired so. So, Krishna is saying very nicely, just like air carries aroma. That's a nice example. The air is passing. Suppose, Prabhupada explains in my lecture very nicely. Suppose if the air is passing through a rose garden and you happen to stand there, you happen to be there, you will get nice rose fragrance. Suppose the air is passing through some recycling plant of the corporation, city corporation, and suppose you happen to be there, you will get very bad fragrance, bad smell rather, isn't it? The air is passing, but as it is passing, whatever is coming in its proximity, it is carrying that fragrance, that smell. Exactly like that. The mind, as it comes in contact with different sense objects, and it concocts different kinds of sense enjoyments from those sense objects. I can enjoy in this way, that way. It concocts in various ways. The soul is experiencing those concocted forms of suffering and happiness and suffering also. Both are concoctions of the mind. Because why it is concoction? Because it's an interaction of the sense and the sense object, not the interaction of the soul. Presently, the soul is in a dormant state. It is a mute observer. Soul is only observing. Soul is not acting presently. In the conditional state of material existence, soul is not acting. Only the senses and the sense objects are working actively in this world. Very important thing to understand. Soul is not acting. Soul is only having the experience of suffering and happiness, but not a direct experience of suffering and happiness. It is only a indirect experience, a feeling, not direct experience. Direct experience is possible only in the spiritual platform with the spiritual senses. So there are spiritual objects and spiritual senses. The soul interacts on that platform actually. But now the soul is routing its experience through an external agency called material senses, material sense objects, which is foreign to the soul. This is the basic concept of the Bhagavad Gita teaching. Krishna is saying this body and the sense objects, this material world is foreign to the soul. So what interaction is happening, we're taking it as our interaction, as our experience. Basically, you're attaching some experience as belonging to you. Somebody's experience as belonging to you. Who is that somebody? That somebody is actually the senses and the sense objects. It's actually somebody. It is not you. Why it is not you? It is given to you. It is not you. If it is yours, there's nothing to give you. It is yours only. There's nothing like acquiring. The moment you say you acquired, you should know it is foreign, not yours. Because if it is yours, there's nothing to acquire. It is yours. When you acquire, that means it is external. It has become yours now, not earlier. So this fine understanding must be there. That's why from the very beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is saying, always Krishna is separating, soul is different, body is different. Soul is different, senses are different. Material senses are different. Sense objects are different. That is not your field of activity. But presently, this is our field of activity in this world. Anyway, so just like air is carrying aroma as it is passing, similarly, the mind is creating different conceptions of life, different conceptions of experience of life. If the situation is like this, you will be happy. If the situation is like this, you will not be happy. So mind is actually dictating. He has become a professor, basically. Mind has become a professor in our life. He is constantly dictating, this is good, this is bad, this is very nice, this is not nice. So mind is dictating. And the soul is helplessly accepting all those dictations and also accepting its version. So therefore, our present experience of happiness and distress or suffering is basically a lesson or a training given by the mind. We have taken tuition from the mind. As the mind has taught us, that's how we have framed and grouped our happiness and distress as. Just imagine. So mind has taught us, this is happiness, this is suffering. This is nice, this is not nice. And we have accepted those definitions of happiness and suffering. So this is called concoction. Why it is called concoction? Because it is not equal to reality. What is concoction? Concoction is something which is not true. So that is why it's called concoction. Interestingly, the experience of happiness which the mind presents, the experience of suffering which the mind presents, both are concoction. Because it has nothing to do with the soul and the spiritual platform. It's only happening in the material platform between the senses and the sense objects. And both are lifeless. Senses are lifeless, sense objects are lifeless. But the experience is creating a kind of live experience. That is why it is concoction. That is why it is concoction. Just like you may feel good, pleasant atmosphere now. Now I have electronic gadget here in front of me. Is it experiencing that pleasant atmosphere? It cannot experience. And very soon, maybe after 3 to 4 hours from now, it will be hot afternoon. And I'll feel not very pleasant. The same thing. Now, whether this electronic gadget will experience that unpleasant atmosphere, it will not. Because it is dead matter. It is dead matter. It doesn't experience. But I'm experiencing. Because I'm a live person. That means experience is possible only for a person, living entity, not for dead matter. Matter is always dead, by the by. There's nothing like dead matter. Matter is always dead. There's nothing like live matter and dead matter. Matter is dead. And as far as soul is concerned, there's nothing like live soul and dead soul. Soul is always alive, eternally, perpetually. Soul is life, matter is dead. So there's no experience in matter. But the mind is presenting that experience. That is why it is concoction. Anyway, so based on the conceptions of the mind, which the mind creates by interaction with the material nature, Karanam Guna Sangosya Sad Asad Yoni Janmasu, by interaction with material nature, interaction between the sense and the sense objects, different impressions are created. Different impressions are created. Now, this word impression is very important. Prabhupada used the word impression. What is the meaning of the word impression? Impression means something which remains strong in your mind, in your heart, in your subconscious level. That's called impression. So you pass through so many situations in life, right? But some things impress you or impact you strongly, which you don't forget. Good or bad, both things. There are two kinds of things. There are good things which you never forget. There are bad things which you never forget. We call it as impactful or an impression. So it leaves an impression in your consciousness. So when you go through life, there are certain impressions which the mind creates on your consciousness. And you think that is what you are. You identify with those material impressions or experiences. And then that gets attached or stuck to the soul externally. Because soul is always asungoyam purushaha. Soul is always separate from any material thing. Soul has nothing to do with material counterpart. Soul is different, matter is different. Asanga ayam purusha, this is what the Vedas say. The soul never attaches to anything material. But temporarily, it can, the nature of the soul cannot be changed. Intrinsic nature of the soul cannot be changed. But soul can temporarily accept certain impressions as its own impression and experience. Based on that impression and conception, we are awarded another body. So, Prabhupada explains elsewhere, if your conception is like that of a cat or a dog or an animal, you get a body accordingly. Therefore, what kind of impression we carry in our life is very important. Different kinds of impressions are there or conceptions are there. So based on impressions, based on conceptions, you get the next body. Based on what nature you acquire, godly nature, humanly nature, demoniac nature, based on what nature you acquire, you get that body. So you acquire godly quality, you may get a Devata body. You acquire demonic quality, you may acquire an animal's body or an Asura body. You acquire Krishna conscious qualities, then you will be transferred to the kingdom of God or Krishna Loka. Prabhupada explains this in one of the purports. So, what conception you carry is very, very important. What impressions you carry is very important. So if we go on concocting more and more things with our mind, that means it is for sure you are extending your term of imprisonment within this body. You are extending your term of stay in this material world. So if you want to put an end to the cycle of birth and death, you have to once and for all get away with the entire material conception of life and cultivate spiritual conception of life, which is natural and original and natural to the soul. Natural. It is very logical and very objective. If you want to live the life of a soul, then you have to be in line with that kind of life, that kind of impression, that kind of conception. If you want to lead a materialistic way of life, then you nurture that kind of conception, those kind of conceptions. Natural. So, so Krishna is saying, Shrotram chakshu sparshanam cha rasanam granam eva cha adhishtaya manaschayam vishayan upasevate. Krishna is saying, the living entity, thus taking another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, Shrotram, Chakshuhu, eyes, Sparshanam, skin or touch, Rasanam, a tongue, Granam, nose. So living entity takes on another body, gross body. When he takes another gross body, he obtains a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and sense of touch. Adhishtaya manascha ayam, grouped about the mind. Vishayan upasevate. Why? So that Vishayan upasevate, he can enjoy a particular kind of sense object. That's what you see. A cat also has got eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin. Human has got eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin. Tiger has got eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin. Snake has got its own. Not the same. No, what is my sense object is not the same as a snake's or a tiger's. The tiger likes flesh, fresh blood, etc., etc. It could be in eating, could be in any form of enjoyment. Not only in eating, in all aspects of enjoyment, what one can conceive of. Similarly, based on your body, a particular ear, eye, tongue, each of its liking is different. Will you like fish food? You will not like. So you require a fish tongue to like fish food. See, it's so scientific. Will the cow like humans' food? It will not like. It has its own food and taste. It has its own sense of what is good sound, pleasant sound and unpleasant sound, pleasant touch, unpleasant touch, pleasant smell, unpleasant smell. So based on a particular nose, eyes, everything is different. What it likes, it doesn't like in terms of form may not be the same as yours. So, but Adhishtaya Manaschayam, all grouped about the mind. That is why mind is called the master of the senses. The mind is dictating. Just says this combination is good, this combination is not good. The mind is the master. So Krishna is saying finally here, although this is a fact, based on the mind, dictation of the mind, domination of the mind, not only in the senses, which the mind is dominating the senses, the mind is dominating even the soul. The mind is dominating even the soul and telling the soul, see, this is happiness. This combination is nice. This situation is nice. This is not nice. The mind is dictating. But what is Vastava? It is only material nature, which is neutral. Like Prabhupada says, water is neither cold nor hot. It is only your interpretation of that water as being cold, as being pleasant or unpleasant when you come in touch with it. It is your interpretation. Water is the same always. So like that, the mind is dictating that interpretation and passing it on to the soul, and the soul is accepting it. 100% surrendered to the mind. So, therefore Krishna is saying, because of the dictation and domination of the mind on the soul, we are accepting the mind's impressions, conceptions as ours and proceeding. Therefore, accordingly, we are getting the next body without choice. The mind is controlling the whole situation. But for sure, we are transmigrating because there are so many conceptions in the mind to enjoy or to suffer. So that has to be provided an opportunity. But if you have no more conceptions about material life, your material life ends. This is the secret of liberation. If you have no more conceptions and impressions, material conceptions about this existence, material existence, then there's no more rebirth. But Krishna is saying in the next verse, Utkramantam stitam vapi bunjanam va gunanvitam vimoda na anupashyanti pashyanti jnana chakshushaha. It's very important. Krishna is saying in text 10, the foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can he understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. So there's an agreement made between the mind and the modes of nature. There's an MOU. So actually, some cheating has happened to the soul, but the soul is not recognizing and understanding all this. That's why Krishna is saying, Vimudha, a foolish person cannot see that there's a parallel agreement being made between mind and the material nature and the modes of nature. To enjoy illusory. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. Pashyanti can see. Jnana chakshusha, who's trained, can see. Then lastly, Krishna is saying in this context, text 11, uh, who is that person who can see? What is the qualification? Because I can also practice then. I want to be a person who can see these things, how things are moving in this world, how reincarnation is taking place, how I am changing body. Then I can choose my body, or I can even stop acquiring another material body and attain a spiritual body. But for that, you should see, you should have knowledge. So, who is that person in knowledge? Who is that person who can see? Krishna is saying, Yatanto yoginas chainam pashyantyatmani avastitam. Krishna is saying, only a transcendentalist or a spiritualist, one who is practicing spiritual life, it is situated in self-realization. Atmani avastitam, situated in the self, practicing self-realization or practicing spiritual life. Yatantaha, who is practicing, endeavoring. So one who is practicing spiritual life, he can clearly see all this. The endeavoring transcendentalists who are situated in self-realization can see all this clearly. Yatanto hi akrita atmanaha. On the other hand, one who is not practicing any kind of spiritual life or sense control, akritatmanaha, nainam pashyanti achetasaha. He cannot see anything what is going on in his life. How the living is transmigrating from one body to another, he doesn't understand at all. Forget transmigration. Those who are akritatmanaha cannot even know the difference between body and soul. They struggle. The other day, we had been to Vrindavan Yatra. One Western devotee was telling me, Prabhu, here people understand body and soul when you say, very easily they understand. And karma they understand. Next life they understand. So they may practice, they may not practice different things. At least they understand these definitions very easily. What is next life? What is karma? What is body? What is soul? Just like that they know. Even children know. But in the Western world, if you come, it is so hard to make them understand, so difficult for them to understand body and soul. They cannot even make a distinction between body and soul and forget next life and all. That much hard it is. And karma, how it is working, and the impact of that work upon one's consciousness, upon the soul, upon one's future, upon one's destiny. Nothing they understand, Prabhu. One person from England was telling me this, from London. In Govardhan, he was telling me. Just imagine. So Krishna is saying, Akritatmanaha, one who is not self-controlled cannot understand. One who is not in spiritual life cannot understand anything. But one who is practicing spiritual life and endeavoring, he can see all this very clearly. So Vasudeva, you can imagine, is trying to explain an asura how tough task it is. So Vasudeva is saying that just like you move on the road by putting one foot and then take the other foot, or as a worm on a vegetable moves on to the next leaf, after it goes on to the gets on to the next leaf, it gives up the earlier leaf. Similarly, the conditioned soul takes shelter of another body and then gives up the present one. I'll stop here. Granthrat Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Prabhupada ki jai.